Hi, my name is Caden Vu, and today I will be reading Giraffes Can Dance by Giles Andreas. To start off, I'd like to connect to our essential question, which is how does the physical, emotional, and instructional environment of our class impact the motivation of learning of all students? So I wanted to use this story to connect to our essential question because the story emphasizes the significance of encouraging an inclusive environment, right? In the beginning, Gerald the giraffe, he lacks self-confidence and he feels like he doesn't fit in because he can't dance like the other animals. So this aspect represents the emotional environment. When students feel like they don't fit in or are not accepted, it can significantly impact their motivation to learn. Obviously, in contrast, when students do experience a classroom where their unique qualities and talents are celebrated, much like the animals who helped Gerald find his own dance, they're more motivated to engage in the learning process. So obviously I don't have the story in front of me right now. If I were in front of a class, that would be a different situation, but for the sake of the project, we'll just have to use our imagination. Alright, so here we go. Giraffes Can Dance by Giles Andreas. Okay, alright. Gerald was a tall giraffe whose neck was long and slim, but his knees were awfully bandy, and his legs were rather thin. He was very good at standing still and munching shoots off trees, but when he tried to run around, he buckled at the knees. Now every year in Africa they hold the jungle dance, where every single animal turns up to skip and prance. And this year, when the day arrived, poor Gerald felt so sad, because when it came to dancing, he was very bad. At this point, I would pause and I would ask my students how they think that Gerald the giraffe felt about himself at this point of the story and why did he feel that way. I would give my students 1 minute to collaborate with their shoulder partner. Okay. We'd continue on, and the story says the warthog started waltzing, and the rhinos rock and rolled. The lions danced a tango, which was elegant and bold. The chimps all did a cha-cha with a very Latin feel, and 8 baboons then teamed up for a splendid Scottish reel. Gerald swallowed bravely as he walked towards the floor, but the lions saw him coming, and they soon began to roar. So at this point, I would pause and I would ask my students, why did the lions begin to roar? Was it in a good way or was it in a not so nice way? Then I would ask my students, I would pick on a couple students to answer that question, and then I would follow up with, can you share a time when you felt like Gerald, lacking confidence or feeling different from others? I'd ask the students to share with a person at their table if they were in groups, or maybe a shoulder partner, so that everyone has a chance to talk. Then we'd continue. Hey, look at clumsy Gerald, the animals laughed. Giraffes can't dance, you silly fool. Oh, Gerald, don't be daft. Gerald simply froze up. He was rooted to the spot. They're right, he thought. I'm useless. Oh, I feel like such a clot. So he crept off from the dance floor and he started walking home. He'd never felt so sad before, so sad and so alone. Then he found a little clearing and he looked up at the sky. The moon can be so beautiful, he whispered with a sigh. Excuse me, coughed a cricket, who'd seen Gerald earlier on. But sometimes when you're different, you just need a different song. Alright, so at this point, I'd pause and I'd ask the students what that quote means. But sometimes when you're different, you just need a different song. I'd ask the students how important it is, I would ask the students why it's important to have good friends and mentors. I'd call on a couple students to answer the question, and then we'd continue on leading to this part of the story. It says, listen to the swaying grass and listen to the trees. To me, the sweetest music is those branches in the breeze. So imagine that the lovely moon is playing just for you. Everything makes music if you really want it to. With that, the cricket smiled and picked up his violin. Then Gerald felt his body do the most amazing thing. His hooves had started shuffling, making circles on the ground. His neck was gently swaying, and his tail was swishing around. So at this point of the story, I would explain to these. Well, I would ask the students if the cricket was actually being a good friend or not to Gerald, and in doing so, how does that make Gerald feel, as opposed to how the lions made them feel. I would then try and connect it with the students and ask them to think about a time when they had a good friend that helped them get out of a bad mood. Yeah. I'd allow them to collaborate with the people around them. All right. He threw his arms out sideways, and he swung them everywhere. Then he did a backward somersault and leapt up in the air. Gerald felt so wonderful his mouth was open wide. I am dancing, yes, I am dancing, I am dancing, Gerald cried. Then one by one, each animal who'd been there at the dance arrived while Jerry boogied and watched him entranced. They shouted, it's a miracle, we must be in a dream. Gerald's the best dancer that we ever seen. How is it you can dance like that? Please, Gerald, tell us how. But Gerald simply twizzled round and finished with a bow. Then he raised his head and looked up at the moon and stars above. We all can dance, he said, when we find music that we love. So that's the end of the story. At that point, I would ask the students to stand up and get out of their chairs so that we can do a hand up, pair up situation. So I would like to ask the students, what do you think we all can dance when we find music that we love means? And then I'd ask, how does it apply to your own life? So the students would have time to stand up, hand up, and pair up and talk about that. Hopefully the things that they would talk about would apply to the story and how it applies to how they can connect it to their own lives. Once that is finished, I would end the entire lesson by asking them, if you were in this story, which animal would you be? And then it would be a corner and corner situation. So come to this corner if you would be Gerald, who is feeling maybe down, and maybe the animal who, or the person who needs a friend or a mentor in their life. And then in this separate corner, I would say maybe you are the cricket in this story. Maybe you know someone who is feeling down or who needs a friend and who needs a little pick-me-up. So I allowed them to go to their separate corners, and I'd probably call on a couple students in each corner to share their answers. And that's how I would end that. Thank you for listening.